Time has a way of changing everything, except the things that matter most. For 20 years, the silence between that farmhouse and the wider world grew thick as winter frost. Mabel Hart tended her land, season after season, her back bending a little more each year. And Daniel Miller, well, Daniel built an empire. But some promises don't rust, some debts don't fade. They just wait for the right moment to come due. This is part 2, The Promise Kept. The years after Daniel's departure moved with the deceptive speed of seasons observed from a fixed point. Mabel turned 60, then 65. Her hair, once dark with only threads of silver, became predominantly gray, as if the color had migrated to her eyes, which seemed to grow sharper, clearer, as though compensating for other diminishments. The first year was the hardest, not because the work increased. It was the same acreage, the same chores, but because every task echoed. When she hauled water from the pump, she remembered small hands reaching to help. When she planted beans, she recalled a voice reciting spacing measurements like sacred text. When winter storms rattled the windows, she lay awake listening for a cough that never came. She received exactly 2 letters. The first arrived 6 months after Daniel left. Postmarked from a Massachusetts boarding school she'd looked up in the tattered atlas on her shelf. The handwriting was neat, practiced, alien. Dear Mabel, the school has 300 acres for agricultural study. We're learning soil chemistry. The food is terrible, but plentiful. Grandfather says I must focus on practical applications of farming, not sentimental attachments. I hope your tomatoes did well this year. I planted some here in the greenhouse. Yours, Daniel. Practical applications, sentimental attachments. The phrases felt borrowed, words he'd collected and arranged without fully owning them. She read the letter 3 times, then folded it into the family Bible, beside a pressed forget-me-not, from her mother's garden. The second letter came a year later, shorter. Mabel, I won first prize at the science fair for a study on mycorrhizal fungi and crop yield. Grandfather wasn't impressed. He says real business happens in boardrooms, not dirt. Summer internship starts next week at his corporate headquarters. I'll be analyzing land acquisition portfolios. Hope the fences held through winter. Daniel. After that, silence. Mabel didn't write back. What would she say? That the tomatoes had indeed done well? That the north fence had finally succumbed to rot and she'd replaced it herself, hands bleeding through gloves? That sometimes at dusk she still set 2 plates out of habit? Instead, she worked. The farm became both refuge and battlefield. As development crept closer, first the Gable farm sold, then the Henderson place, then Old Man Peterson's orchard, her 47 acres became an island in a sea of transformation. Where wheat once waved, identical houses sprouted. Where cows grazed, strip malls stretched. The offers became more frequent, more aggressive. Different companies now, with names suggesting pastoral harmony. Green Horizon Holdings, Heritage Development Group, Pastoral Properties Inc. The men, always men, who came wore nicer suits, drove cleaner cars, and carried thicker folders. The county's reevaluating agricultural zoning, one told her, smiling with teeth too white for sincerity. Without that designation, your property taxes could triple. I've paid my taxes on time for 40 years, Mabel replied, not inviting him in. That's not the point, Mrs. Hart. The point is viability. Can this land sustain you through retirement, through medical expenses, through... It sustained me this long. He left a glossy brochure featuring smiling seniors in a transitional living community. She used it to line the chicken coop. The real pressure began in her 68th year, not with offers but with inspections. The first inspector arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning. a young man with a clipboard and an officious air. He circled her barn, tapping support beams with a small hammer, frowning at notes. "These structural issues are significant," he said, shaking his head. "And the electrical, that wiring's not to code. Hasn't been for decades." "It works," Mabel said. "Working isn't the same as compliant." He made more notes. "You'll receive notification of required repairs." The notice came a week later, a dense, bureaucratic document listing 17 immediate hazards and giving her 30 days to address them. The estimated cost, provided by a county-approved contractor, was more than she made in 2 years. She visited the county office herself, something she hadn't done in a decade. The building had been renovated, all glass and steel where wood and brick once stood. Inside, people moved with hurried purpose between cubicles, speaking into headsets, typing on keyboards that made no sound. She waited 40 minutes before a clerk directed her to a junior official whose nameplate read, "Mr. Davies." He listened with the distracted air of someone mentally composing an email. "The inspection reports are clear, Mrs. Hart. The county has safety standards. My father built that barn with his own hands in 1948. It's stood through hurricanes. Building codes have evolved since 1948. So has common sense." He sighed, as if she were a child refusing to understand simple arithmetic. "Look, I'll be frank. Several developers have expressed interest in your parcel. If you were to sell, these compliance issues would become someone else's problem. They want the land cleared," she said, the realization dawning like winter sunrise, cold and stark. "This isn't about safety. It's about clearing the land." Mr. Davies' expression didn't change, but something in his eyes confirmed her suspicion. "I'm simply explaining your options." More inspectors came. Health Department, Environmental Control, Fire Safety. Each found new violations. Each issued new orders. The repair estimates grew until they reached a sum so absurd it felt like parody. Mabel began keeping a ledger, not of repairs, but of visits. Dates, names, violations cited. She noticed patterns. Inspections always clustered before county zoning meetings. Violations always multiplied when development proposals were pending for adjacent properties. The approved contractors all shared the same post office box. She showed her ledger to the town's only remaining independent lawyer, a man named Carter, who'd handled her sister's will years before. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing grave. "They're boxing you in, Mabel. Making ownership so burdensome, you'll have to sell. Is it legal? It's gray. They're using existing codes just aggressively and selectively." He tapped a page. "Notice they never inspect the new developments? Those houses are slapped up in 90 days, but I guarantee they pass every inspection." "What do I do?" Carter leaned back, his chair squeaking protest. "Fight. Document everything. Go to every zoning meeting. Get neighbors to support you." But the neighbors were gone, sold or silenced. The few remaining farmers were older than her, facing their own battles. The community that once shared harvests and hardships had been replaced by commuters who left before dawn and returned after dark, their lives orbiting distant cities. The final blow came not from inspectors, but from the bank. A letter arrived in a crisp envelope, not the windowed kind for bills, but formal stationery. The language was polite, sterile. "Reevaluating our agricultural loan portfolio. Changing risk assessment models. Regrettably unable to renew your line of credit." Mabel sat at her kitchen table, the letter before her. The line of credit was small, $5,000, but crucial. It bridged the gap between planting and harvest, covered emergency repairs, bought seed for next year's crop. Without it, she was operating without a net. She thought of Daniel then, not as the boy he'd been, but as the young man who'd written about analyzing land acquisition portfolios. Had he learned, in those corporate offices, how to pressure small landowners? Had he become part of this machine that measured land only in square footage and profit margins? The question felt like betrayal, but it came anyway, whispering in the quiet house. That night, she dreamt of her father, not as the old man he'd been at his death, but in his prime, shirtless in summer sun, turning earth with a strength that seemed endless. In the dream, he pointed to the horizon, where development crept like slow lava. "They think land is something you own," he said, his voice clear, as though he stood beside her. "But it's something you belong to. Remember that when they come with papers and numbers. You don't own this dirt, you belong to it, and it to you." She woke with tears on her cheeks, the first she'd shed since Daniel left. Not tears of self-pity, but of grief for something larger than herself. A way of life, a covenant between people and place, unraveling thread by bureaucratic thread. The next morning, she rose earlier than usual. She walked the property line as dawn bled pink across the sky. At the eastern border, where her land met the new subdivision, she placed her palm against a fence post. The wood was warm already, storing yesterday's sun. "I'm still here," she whispered, to the land, to her father, to the ghost of the boy who'd promised to return. "I'm still belonging." But as she turned back toward the house, she noticed something new. Surveyor's stakes with orange ribbons, driven into the ground just beyond her fence, marking, measuring, preparing. The silent war was entering its final phase, and she was running out of ground to defend. The eviction notice arrived on a Thursday, delivered not by mail, but by a county deputy in a crisp uniform, who stood on her porch with the posture of someone delivering bad news they didn't fully understand. "Court order, ma'am." He held out the envelope as if it might bite. "You have 30 days to vacate." Mabel took the papers. They were heavier than expected, dense with legal language that swam before her eyes. Failure to remedy cited violations, imminent hazard designation, public nuisance, authorized forcible removal. "There must be a mistake," she said, though she knew there wasn't. "You can contest it in court." The deputy's voice was gentle, which made it worse. Pity was the final insult. "But you'd need a lawyer, a good one." After he left, she spread the documents on the kitchen table. They made a mosaic of doom: inspection reports, violation notices, court filings, an order signed by a judge whose name she didn't recognize. At the bottom of the stack was a color-coded map showing her property outlined in red, labeled Parcel 17B, Acquisition Priority 1. She tried calling Carter, the lawyer. His office phone rang unanswered. She drove into town, only to find his storefront office dark, a for lease sign in the window. The hardware store clerk told her in a hushed voice that Carter had moved to Florida abruptly after his wife's illness. "Developers bought his building," the clerk added, not meeting her eyes. "Whole blocks going." The following week brought what Mabel came to think of as the paper storm. Official notices arrived daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Final utility bills with disconnection pending stamps. Tax reassessments with shocking new valuations. Even a notice from the Historical Society, a society she hadn't known existed, declaring her farm not of significant historical value, and therefore unprotected. Each piece of paper felt like a stone added to a wall between her and her own life. She attended the zoning meeting alone. The room was modern, with microphones at every seat and screens displaying agendas in glowing text. She wore her one good dress, navy blue and 20 years out of fashion. The developer's representatives wore suits that cost more than her tractor. When her parcel number was called, she approached the microphone. Her voice, unused to public speaking, trembled slightly. "This farm has been in my family for 3 generations. We've fed this community. We've cared for the land. These violations they're citing, they're not about safety. They're about wanting my land cleared for more houses." The board members, 5 faces she vaguely recognized from newspaper photos, listened with polite indifference. One checked his phone, another made notes. "Do you have documentation refuting the inspection reports?" the chairman asked. "I have my eyes. I've lived there 60 years. I know what's safe." "That's not documentation, Mrs. Hart. That's anecdote." She tried to explain about the selective enforcement, the connected contractors, the pattern of inspections before development approvals. Her words tangled, becoming emotional when she meant to be factual. She saw the moment she lost them, a slight leaning back in chairs, exchanged glances. "Your time is up," the chairman said, not unkindly. "The board will take your comments under advisement." They voted unanimously to uphold the violations. On the drive home, Mabel realized she was crying, hot, angry tears that blurred the road. She pulled over, letting the old truck idle on the shoulder, as sobs racked her body. Not just for the farm, but for the terrible loneliness of fighting something vast and faceless, for the realization that the world had created systems specifically designed to make people like her disappear quietly. The final days passed with surreal speed. She began packing not with purpose, but with numbness. What did you take when leaving a life? The photo of her parents on their wedding day, her father's tools, what remained after she'd pawned some for Daniel, the family Bible with its pressed flowers and 2 letters, a quilt her mother had made. Everything else, furniture, dishes, the accumulated detritus of decades, felt suddenly weightless, insignificant, just things. Neighbors from the new development sometimes stopped to watch. They stood at the fence line, holding Starbucks cups, their expressions a mix of curiosity and vague discomfort. Once, a woman about Mabel's age approached. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "It's a shame, but progress, you know?" Mabel looked at her, manicured hands, yoga pants, the casual certainty of someone whose world was expanding, not contracting. "What are you progressing toward?" Mabel asked. The woman blinked, confused by the question. "Well, better schools, property values, convenience. We had good schools, the land had value, and I was never inconvenienced." The woman retreated, her sympathy evaporating in the face of what she clearly perceived as bitterness. The night before the eviction, Mabel didn't sleep. She walked through the house, touching walls, door frames, windowsills, as if memorizing their texture. She went outside and stood in the garden, moonlight silvering the tomato plants. She remembered Daniel at 10, carefully spacing seeds, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. She thought of his promise, not the one about repaying her, but the earlier, simpler one. "I won't forget." Had he? In the world of boardrooms and portfolios, of practical applications over sentimental attachments, had memory become another commodity to be managed? Dawn came too soon, a clear, beautiful morning that felt like mockery. Birds sang as if it were any other day. The air held the scent of dew on grass, of soil awakening. Mabel dressed in her work clothes, denim pants, faded shirt, boots. If they were going to take her land, they would see her as she was, a farmer, not a victim. She made coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen window. She didn't eat. At exactly 8 a.m., she heard the first engines. They came not as a single vehicle, but as a convoy. County trucks, a flatbed for her belongings, a white van with tinted windows. The procession moved with practiced efficiency, parking in a semicircle that blocked the driveway. Doors opened. Men emerged, some in uniforms, some in work clothes. They didn't look at her at first, busy with clipboards and radios. The inspector, the same one from the first visit, approached the porch. His expression was different today, not officious, but almost apologetic. "Mrs. Hart, we need to proceed." She nodded. "I know. You should wait by the road, for your safety." "I'll wait here." He hesitated, then shrugged. The signal was given. What followed had a nightmarish quality, familiar objects handled by strangers, removed from their contexts. Her kitchen table carried out not for a meal, but for storage. Her bed disassembled, mattress exposed to daylight. Books boxed without regard to order or care. Mabel stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her. She focused on her breathing, on the solid feel of porch boards beneath her feet. She would not cry. She would not beg. She would bear witness. But when they carried out the photograph of her parents and it slipped, shattering glass against stone, something broke in her too. A sound escaped her, not a sob, but a gasp, as if the air had been punched from her lungs. Her knees buckled. She reached for the pump handle, missed, and fell hard, the impact jarring up through her bones. Dirt filled her mouth, gritty and tasting of iron. For a moment, she considered staying there, face down, letting them remove her along with the furniture, letting the land take her back. Then a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, rhythmic thumping that grew from vibration to roar. Wind whipped suddenly, swirling dust into miniature tornadoes. Men shielded their eyes. Mabel looked up as a helicopter descended over the far field, its shadow falling across her like a blessing. The helicopter didn't land so much as command the earth to receive it. Rotor wash flattened the remaining corn stalks in the far field, creating a perfect circle of submission. Dust exploded outward in a biblical cloud, coating uniforms, vehicles, and Mabel's tear-streaked face with fine brown powder. For a moment, everyone froze. Deputies with boxes suspended mid-lift, workers half-turned, the inspector with his clipboard raised as if to shield his eyes. The scene held like a paused film, destruction interrupted by descent. The engine wound down with a descending whine. The door slid open. A man stepped out, early 40s, dressed not in a suit, but in dark jeans, boots, and a jacket that looked expensive in its simplicity. He moved with the calm authority of someone accustomed to having doors opened and obstacles removed. Just purpose. He scanned the scene, the trucks, the scattered belongings, the men holding her life in their hands, and his expression tightened, jaw muscle working. Then his eyes found Mabel, still on her knees in the dirt, one hand pressed to the ground as if trying to hold it in place. He crossed the distance quickly, boots kicking up little puffs of dust. The deputy moved to intercept, but the man raised a hand without breaking stride, a gesture that said, "Not now." Crouching before Mabel, he kept a respectful distance, not touching her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower than she remembered, but with a timbre that tugged at some deep memory. "Are you hurt?" She tried to speak, but her throat had closed. She shook her head, dirt sprinkling from her hair. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Mabel," she managed. "Mabel Hart." He closed his eyes for a full second, a flinch of recognition he couldn't conceal. When he opened them, something had shifted, a mask dropping, a decision made. He reached out, not to help her up, but to offer his hand palm up, an invitation rather than an assumption. She took it. His grip was firm, warm, steadying. He guided her to her feet, then to the porch step, his movements careful, as if she were something fragile. Only when she was seated did he turn to face the others. The inspector recovered first. "Sir, this is a county enforcement action." "Stop," the man said, not shouted. Just one word, clean as a scalpel cut. "Everything stops. Now." "You don't have the authority." "I have all the authority that matters." He pulled a phone from his pocket. "My firm is the primary investor in the Green Valley Corridor development. We own the holding company that subcontracts your inspection agency. And these," he scrolled, turned the screen. "These reports are forged. Badly." The inspector's face lost its color. There must be some mistake, yes, a criminal one. He made a call, putting it on speaker. A woman's efficient voice answered instantly. "Send the compliance files for parcel 17B to everyone on this distribution list. And contact the state attorney general's office. Tell them we have evidence of systematic fraud in county land acquisitions." Phones began buzzing around the yard. The deputy lowered his box, pulling out his own device. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to dawning alarm. Daniel, because it was Daniel, though Mabel's mind still couldn't bridge the 25-year gap between boy and man, scrolled through documents on his screen. "These inspection dates, your office was closed for county furlough days. These signatures, they match ones from 3 other disputed parcels. This court order references Zoning Amendment 14C, which failed in committee last year." He looked up, meeting each official's eyes in turn. "This isn't incompetence. This is conspiracy." The word hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. The convoy's energy shifted instantly. Men who moments before had been efficient agents of eviction now looked at each other with unease. The deputy stepped forward, his tone newly respectful. "Sir, if you could provide those documents to me." Daniel forwarded them with a tap. "They're already with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They've been building a case for months. Your office is featured prominently." Panic, clean and cold, moved through the group. The inspector started toward his truck. Daniel's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't. Your vehicle GPS places you here at an unauthorized enforcement. Adds to the pattern." He turned back to Mabel. His professional mask had slipped completely now, revealing the boy she remembered in the lines around his eyes, the set of his mouth when worried. "I was already in the area," he said softly, for her ears only, "reviewing the development plans. When I saw the parcel number on the seizure schedule, it stuck. I had to come." She stared at him, trying to reconcile memories. The thin boy hiding bread in his pockets. The teenager hugging her on this porch in the rain. This man with a helicopter and the power to stop county governments mid-action. "They wanted me to sell," she whispered, needing him to understand this first. "I didn't." "I know." He knelt before her again, putting them at eye level. "That's why they came this way. People who won't be bought have to be broken." He stood, addressing the deputy. "The eviction is suspended. All items will be returned to their original positions. You will leave. Now." They moved with the awkward haste of retreat. Boxes were carried back inside, furniture returned to approximate locations. The worker who had dropped the photograph carefully gathered the broken glass and frame, placing the intact picture on the porch rail with a mumbled, "Sorry, ma'am." Within 20 minutes, the trucks were gone. Dust settled once more. The helicopter sat in the field, like a giant insect at rest. And Daniel stood before her, looking suddenly uncertain, the authority draining away to reveal something more vulnerable. "Can I?" He gestured toward the house. "Can I come in?" Mabel nodded, rising slowly. Her knees protested, stiff from the fall. He didn't offer to help this time, understanding perhaps that she needed to enter her home under her own power. The kitchen was as they'd left it that morning. 2 coffee cups on the counter, hers empty, the second one clean and waiting. She'd set it out from habit, a ritual she couldn't break, even on the day of her removal. Daniel noticed. His breath caught slightly. "You remember," she said, not a question. "Everything." He ran a hand over the table's surface, tracing a deep scratch he'd made at 12, trying to carve his initials, before thinking better of it. "The way the light hits this window at 4 p.m., the sound the pump makes when it needs priming, which floorboard creaks near the stove." He moved through the room as if relearning it, touched the cast iron skillet on its hook, opened the pantry door, saw the neat rows of canned goods, the flour sack folded precisely at the top. "You're still using the 5-jar rotation system," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "You taught me that." He turned, his expression complex. I assumed you'd be gone, moved to town, retired. When the letters stopped, you stopped writing," she said gently. He flinched. "Grandfather thought it was an unhealthy attachment. He monitored my mail. After a while, I assumed you'd moved on, that the farm was sold, that my promise was—" He trailed off, looking out the window toward the helicopter. "I built all this," he gestured vaguely, indicating not just the aircraft but the power it represented, thinking I was too late, that I'd missed my chance to keep my word. Mabel filled the kettle, lit the stove. The familiar ritual grounded her. "You came today." "Almost didn't. The meeting ran late. Traffic to the airfield." He shook his head. "Another hour and I'd have been reviewing demolition schedules instead of stopping them." The kettle whistled. She poured water over tea leaves, the cheap kind she bought in bulk, not whatever expensive blends he likely drank now. He accepted the chipped mug without comment, wrapping his hands around it as if for warmth. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the tick of the kitchen clock, the same one that had counted the minutes of his childhood here. "Tell me," she said at last. "Tell me what you built." So he did, not as a boast, but as a confession. The agriculture degree his grandfather insisted on, useful for land valuation. The MBA, because farming is a business, not a lifestyle. The rapid rise in his grandfather's development firm. The specialization in land optimization, a euphemism for converting farms to subdivisions with maximum profit margins. "I became exactly what you taught me not to be," he said, his voice thick. "I measured soil by square footage, not nutrients. I evaluated farms by development potential, not yield. I sat in rooms where people like you were called holdouts and impediments to progress. And yet you're here." He met her eyes, "Because every time I reviewed a parcel, I heard your voice. You don't own the land, you belong to it. Every time I saw a farm on a map, I saw this one. Every holdout had your face." He pulled out his phone, showed her an app with maps, overlays, data streams. 3 years ago, I started tracking certain parcels, ones with irregularities in inspections, sudden tax hikes, pressured sales, built a database, went to law school at night. When the patterns became clear, I took them to prosecutors. But these things move slowly, too slowly for people living the consequences. He zoomed in on her property. When this one popped up last week with an expedited eviction, something felt wrong. The timing, the violations list, the contractor bids. Then I saw the name on the original deed. Hart. The tea had gone cold. Neither of them had drunk. "What happens now?" Mabel asked. "Now," Daniel said, standing, "we make sure this never happens again. To you, to anyone." Outside, the first of the real reinforcements arrived, not county trucks, but unmarked sedans with state plates. Men and women in professional dress emerged, carrying equipment cases. One approached Daniel, nodding respectfully. "Forensic teams here." The AG's office is taking lead. They want you available for testimony. Daniel nodded, then looked back at Mabel. They'll need to ask you questions. It might take days. You can stay in town if... I'll stay here. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen, and in it she finally recognized the boy completely. I thought you'd say that. As the forensic team began photographing, documenting, collecting evidence from the farm itself, the very land now a crime scene, Mabel watched from her porch. Daniel moved among them, pointing out the surveyor stakes, the mismatched inspection tags, the patterns only someone who knew this land intimately would recognize. The helicopter pilot approached. Mr. Miller, your 3 p.m. conference call with Singapore. Reschedule it. All of them. For the week. But the Tokyo merger will wait. Daniel's voice left no room for argument. Tell them I have a prior commitment, a 20-year-old one. As afternoon deepened toward evening, Mabel realized something. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone on this land. And the people surrounding her weren't there to take it, but to protect it. Daniel returned to the porch as the forensic team packed up. They'll be back tomorrow. There'll be paperwork. Lots of it. I'm used to paperwork. He smiled again, tired now. Would it be all right if I stayed tonight? Not in the house, he added quickly. In the barn. Or the helicopter. I'd like to be here when the sun comes up. Mabel looked at him. This man who'd fallen from the sky to save her, who carried helicopters and attorneys general in his pocket, but who asked permission like the boy who'd once slept on her couch. The couch is still there, she said. It's more comfortable than a helicopter. His eyes glistened in the fading light. He nodded, unable to speak. That night as Mabel lay in her bed, she listened to the familiar sounds of another person in her home, the creak of the old sofa, the sigh of springs, the soft footsteps to the kitchen for water. The same sounds from 25 years before, but deeper now, a man's weight instead of a child's. Outside, the moon rose over fields that were still hers. The land breathed, and for the first time in a decade, Mabel's heart slept through the night. The reckoning arrived not with thunder, but with the quiet efficiency of subpoenas and sealed indictments. In the days following the halted eviction, Mabel's farm became a different kind of focal point, not for destruction, but for reconstruction, of truth, of justice, of what had been almost stolen. State investigators came and went, their vehicles kicking up the same dust as the eviction crew, but with opposite purpose. Daniel stayed. He converted her dining table into a command center. Laptops charging from extension cords run from the generator he'd brought. Maps of the county were spread alongside her mother's lace tablecloth, creating a surreal juxtaposition of technology and tradition. On the third morning, a woman named Agent Torres arrived, sharp-eyed, mid-30s, wearing a blazer that somehow didn't look ridiculous in a farmhouse kitchen. She shook Mabel's hand with a firm grip. Mrs. Hart, we've been building this case for 11 months. Your property was going to be the final piece, the one they took right before we moved in. You were days from being their trophy. She laid out photographs, documents, flowcharts that showed connections Mabel could barely comprehend. County officials, development executives, independent inspectors, even a judge. It's a closed ecosystem, Agent Torres explained. They identified desirable land, usually owned by older residents without heirs nearby. They use code violations to pressure sales. If that doesn't work, they fabricate violations. If that fails, they orchestrate foreclosures through cooperative banks. They've done it 17 times in this county alone. Daniel pointed to a name on the chart. My grandfather's firm. Was, Agent Torres corrected gently. He resigned this morning. His lawyers are negotiating immunity in exchange for testimony against the others. Daniel's face showed no surprise, only a deep sadness. He always said sentiment was the enemy of profit. Mabel touched his arm, a gesture so automatic she didn't realize she'd done it, until she felt the fine wool of his sleeve beneath her fingers. He covered her hand with his own, a silent acknowledgement. The unraveling became public the following week. Morning news showed perp walks, the inspector, 2 county commissioners, a bank manager, all in handcuffs, jackets draped over their wrists. The district attorney gave a press conference using words like racketeering and conspiracy and elder exploitation. Reporters found Mabel's farm. They clustered at the gate until Daniel went out to speak with them. He stood on her porch, the same one where he'd eaten his first meal here 25 years before, and gave a statement that would lead the evening news. "This isn't just about one farm," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "It's about what we value as a community. Do we value growth at any cost, or do we value the people who sustain us, literally with their labor and love of the land?" He didn't mention his grandfather, didn't mention his own role in the development world. He made it about Mabel, about farmers, about the quiet people being pushed aside. Not the new subdivision neighbors, but the few remaining farm families. They brought casseroles and pies, standing awkwardly on her porch, offering apologies for not speaking up sooner. "I was scared they'd come for me next," admitted old Mr. Jenkins, whose dairy farm bordered hers. "We thought you were just being stubborn," said Mrs. Alvarez, from the berry farm 3 miles west. "We didn't know." Mabel accepted their offerings, their apologies. She understood fear. She'd lived with it for years. The most surprising visitor came on a rainy Thursday. Charles Miller. He arrived alone in a modest sedan, no driver, no umbrella. He stood at her door, diminished somehow, the military posture gone, replaced by a stoop that seemed more than physical. "May I come in?" he asked, and for the first time Mabel heard uncertainty in his voice. She led him to the kitchen. He sat at the table, his eyes taking in the same things Daniel had: the worn surfaces, the practical arrangements, the life lived here. "I came to apologize," he said, "to you and to Daniel, if he'll see me. He's in town with the prosecutors." Charles nodded, clasping his hands on the table. They were liver-spotted, trembling slightly. "I thought I was saving him, from poverty, from irrelevance. I saw this," he gestured around the kitchen, "as deprivation. I didn't see it as wholeness." Mabel poured tea, the same cheap kind she'd served Daniel. Charles accepted it without comment. "He learned more here than I could ever teach him," Charles said quietly, "about loyalty, about keeping promises, about what actually matters." He looked up, his eyes surprisingly clear. "He's a better man than I raised him to be, because of you." They sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping against the window. "What will you do now?" Mabel asked. "Testify, then retire. The company," he shook his head, "it will be dissolved or sold, Daniel's recommendation." "And Daniel?" Charles smiled, a sad, proud expression. "He's starting his own firm. Conservation development, he calls it. Building around farms, instead of over them. Using his, what did I call it? Sentimental attachment as a business model." After he left, Mabel stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the wet road. She thought about how tragedy and redemption were often the same story told from different angles. Daniel returned that evening, tired but energized. He spread new plans on the table. Not development plans, but preservation trusts, agricultural easements, legal structures that would lock her land as farmland in perpetuity. "It can never be developed," he explained. "Not by you, not by heirs, not by any future owner. It will always be a farm. Mabel traced the lines of the legal document with a finger. You've done your paying back, Daniel, more than. He shook his head. This isn't payment. This is alignment, making sure my world doesn't destroy yours again. In the following weeks, something remarkable happened. The farm began to heal. Not just legally, but physically. Daniel hired workers, not contractors, but local people who needed jobs. They repaired the barn properly, updated the electrical safely, fortified the fences. They installed an irrigation system that used rainwater catchment, a proper greenhouse for winter growing. But Daniel didn't just hire them, he worked alongside them. Mabel would look out from her kitchen window and see him, sleeves rolled up, learning again how to swing a hammer, how to mix concrete, how to listen to the land. One afternoon she found him in the barn, staring at the empty space where her father's tools had once hung. "I'm sorry," he said without turning, "about the tools I made you sell." "I got them back," she said. He turned, surprised. "Henry at the pawn shop kept them for me. Said he knew I'd come for them someday. I paid him back in installments." She opened a trunk in the corner, revealing the tools, oiled and wrapped, waiting. Daniel touched a plane, his finger tracing the maker's mark. "You kept them." "Some debts," Mabel said softly, "aren't meant to be paid off. They're meant to be carried, to remind us." That night, they ate at the kitchen table, just the two of them. Vegetable stew from her garden, bread she'd baked that morning. Simple food, abundant. "I have to go back to the city tomorrow," Daniel said. "Meetings about the new firm, but I'll be back Friday, and every weekend after." "You don't have to. I want to." He looked around the kitchen, his expression peaceful. "This is where I learned what home means. I spent 20 years trying to build something impressive enough to match that feeling. Turns out I already had it." After dinner, they walked the land as dusk settled. At the highest point where you could see the lights of the subdivision twinkling in the distance, Daniel stopped. "I used to hate those lights," he said. "Thought they were the enemy, but they're just people. People who need to eat, who need to know where their food comes from." He turned to her. "Connect farms like yours to communities like that. Make preservation profitable. Make feeding people more valuable than paving over land." Fireflies began to blink in the gathering dark, little stars mirrored in the grass. Mabel thought of the boy who'd appeared at her tree line, all hunger and fear. The man he'd become, who'd fallen from the sky to save her. The circle that had closed, not perfectly, but truly. "We should go in," she said. "Mosquitoes are coming out." They walked back to the house, its windows glowing yellow in the deepening blue. A light had been left on in the kitchen. It looked, Mabel thought, like a lantern in the dark, like a beacon, like a home. 5 years later, the first official Heart Farm Community Harvest Festival drew over 300 people. Cars lined the dirt road in both directions, parked with the careful consideration of city dwellers unaccustomed to gravel. Children raced through rows of pumpkins, their laughter mixing with the live folk music drifting from the barn. Mabel, now 78, sat in a rocking chair on her porch, watching the celebration unfold on her land. Not just her land anymore, she corrected herself. Their land. The Preservation Trust had been signed, sealed, and embedded in the county records so deeply that changing it would require an act of Congress. Daniel moved through the crowd, easy in his role as both host and farmer. He'd traded his city wardrobe for permanent work clothes, broken-in boots, jeans faded at the knees, a hat shading his eyes. He stopped to show a little girl how to milk the new goat, helped a teenager adjust their grip on a pitchfork for the hay bale toss. laughed at something an elderly neighbor said. From her vantage point, Mabel could see the full arc of transformation. The barn, once sagging, stood straight and proud, its new roof gleaming in the autumn sun. The fields were divided into experimental plots, one for traditional crops, one for regenerative farming techniques Daniel was testing, one set aside as a pollinator sanctuary, buzzing with bees and butterflies. But the most striking change wasn't visible from the porch. It was in the accounting books, in the community-supported agriculture subscriptions that now numbered in the hundreds, in the partnerships with local schools that brought children here to learn where food actually came from. The farm wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, becoming a model, a classroom, a sanctuary. A young woman with a notebook approached the porch. "Mrs. Hart, I'm with the Agricultural College newsletter. Could I ask you a few questions?" Mabel gestured to the empty chair beside her. "For a little while. The pie contest judging starts soon." The woman, Emma, according to her name tag, asked predictable questions. What did she think of the community involvement? How did it feel to see her land preserved forever? Mabel answered patiently, but her attention kept drifting to the crowd, to the faces of people experiencing something they'd only known from supermarket aisles: connection. "One last question," Emma said. "What's the most important thing this farm has grown?" Mabel didn't hesitate. Second chances. As the journalist walked away, Daniel approached, carrying 2 cups of apple cider. He handed her one, leaning against the porch rail. "The State Agriculture Commissioner just arrived," he said. "Wants to talk about replicating this model. There's grant money available." "You'll handle it," Mabel said, sipping the cider. It was tart sweet, pressed from her own apples. "I was thinking you should." She raised an eyebrow. "They need to hear from the person who held the line," he said gently, "who refused to sell, who believed a piece of land was worth more than any development. That's the story that changes minds." Later, as the sun began its descent, Daniel helped her to the makeshift stage near the barn. A microphone waited. The crowd quieted, faces turned upward, expectant. Mabel hadn't prepared a speech. She looked out at them, neighbors old and new, children with pumpkin-sticky hands, elderly couples holding hands, the state official in his suit looking slightly out of place. "My father bought this land in 1946, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "He said it wasn't an investment. It was a covenant, a promise between people and place. For most of my life, I thought I was the last heart who would keep that promise." She glanced at Daniel, who stood at the edge of the stage, his expression soft. "I was wrong," she continued, "because promises aren't just kept by blood. They're kept by choice, by the choice to feed a hungry child, by the choice to remember where you came from, by the choice to come back when you're needed." She paused, gathering words that felt true. This farm almost became houses. Then it became a battleground. Now, she gestured to the fields, the people, the twilight gathering like a blessing. Now it's becoming what it always was meant to be, a place that feeds bodies and souls, that teaches that growth doesn't have to mean destruction, that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay and tend and remember. The applause was warm, sustained. Daniel helped her down from the stage, his hand under her elbow. "You're getting good at speeches," he said. "I've had a good teacher." She squeezed his arm. 25 years of watching you learn the most important lesson, how to listen." As fireworks began to light up the evening sky, a splurge Daniel had insisted on, Mabel thought about time, how it loops back on itself, how a promise made in a feverish whisper had taken a quarter century to fulfill, how the boy she'd fed had returned not just to save her, but to build something larger than either of them. The farm would outlive her. That was the gift Daniel had given her, the freedom to love this land without fear of its future. It would feed generations, teach them, shelter them. The covenant would continue. Daniel returned to her side, handing her a blanket as the evening chill set in. They sat together on the porch steps, watching colors explode over their fields. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up, for teaching me what loyalty looks like, for showing me that some debts aren't burdens, they're compasses." Mabel wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "You came back," she said simply. That's all that ever mattered. The final firework burst into a shower of gold that drifted slowly earthward, reflected in the new irrigation pond, in the windows of the restored farmhouse, in the eyes of the people gathered on land that had been saved, and in doing so, had saved them right back. If this story moved you, if you felt that ache of recognition when Mabel refused to surrender, that lift when the helicopter appeared, that warmth when the circle closed, then you understand something vital. No kindness is ever too small. No promise is ever too old. And sometimes the person you help today becomes the shelter you need decades later. But this is just one story of quiet courage meeting unexpected redemption. What about the teacher who changed a troubled student's life, only to have that student return years later to save the school from closing? Or the nurse who showed extraordinary compassion to a dying patient, whose family later gifted her a life-changing opportunity? Or the stranger who paid for a struggling family's groceries, only to discover they were the CEO interviewing her for her dream job years later? The universe keeps receipts for every act of grace, and they cash in when we least expect it, but most need it. If you want more stories where the good we put into the world returns with unstoppable force, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because every subscription tells us you want more stories that restore your faith in humanity. Let us know with a like. Did this story remind you of a kindness you gave or received? Share this with someone who needs to hear that their quiet decency matters, that their integrity is seen, that the seeds they plant in darkness will someday grow toward the light. Don't miss when the next story drops.